I will call the meeting to order. Madam Secretary, when you're ready, please, a roll call.
Mr. Ackerson,
Here.
Ms. Billman,
Here.
Mr. Fell, Mr. Fitch,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins, Ms. Wadrago, Mr. Turner, Mr. Weisskopf,
Here.
Ms. Hugh.
Here.
We have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? The minutes from the January 24th, 2019 regular Plan Commission meeting. Motion by Mr. Turner.
I have, you do that after.
Yeah, you can do that. Is that a second?
I just have a change, but I think. that
Okay,
we'll
we can do that after.
Yeah, yes, so that's a
It's
second.
Second by Mr. Ackerson. Okay, a weak second, but a second. Do you have a change?
Yes, just at the very end, I made some comments about when we talk about looking at transportation study, that we need to stop assuming that everybody always has cars, and that it's important to look at mass transit, and also look at, because mass transit was one of the reasons, but we need to look at pedestrian, especially pedestrian crossways. I see that made it into the recommendations, but I just wanted to go on record as having made that statement at the end of the meeting.
So do you desire a change or just having it reflected in the record?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So if we could have a voice vote on the minutes, all those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Do we have any communications? Continued public hearing. Plan case 2361 M18 and 2362 SU18, request by Rail Development Corporation to rezone 1.5 acres from B2 and R4 to B3, and for a special use permit to allow multifamily residential use in B3 at 802 through 816 Clark Street, and 406, 406 and a half, and 408 North Lincoln. Mr. Garcia.
Okay, good evening. So you'll recall at the public hearing 2 weeks ago, there were several topics of concern that came up that we'd like to address tonight, and those include sewers and street infrastructure, traffic and access to the site, parking, building height, density, and property values. Before I actually get into all those, I just wanted to give an overview of what I'll be, or of the order I'll be presenting things tonight. So first, I thought it would be beneficial to take a quick photographic tour of the site, just to give some context for those of you who may not have been out to walk the site. And then just to remind you of the existing land uses, the zoning, et cetera. Next, I want to get into those issues that were addressed at the last Plan Commission hearing. After that, I'll briefly discuss the previous attempt in 2016 to rezone these parcels, and then talk about potential redevelopment scenarios for the site based on the outcomes of these cases. And then finally, I'll wrap up, as usual, with the staff recommendation, then also kind of to suggest a potential path forward to address these cases tonight. You'll recall these are two separate cases, a rezoning and a special use permit. They'll be voted on separately. So we just wanted to suggest that you could, that you may wish to consider them separately, so that they don't, so that it's just easier to, to get through them. Okay. So without further ado, get started. So I'll just try and go through these images briefly. This is the southeast part of the site. This is looking west on Clark Street. So the site in question is off to the right side of the image. You can see there's some single-family rental homes on that side of the street. Then going to the opposite end of Clark Street, this is at Clark and Lincoln. This is looking north towards the parcel that's currently zoned B2. You'll see the corner of the site is vacant. Then there's another single-family residential house on the right side. And then in the background, this white two-story building is on the currently zoned B3 parcels. That's on the north part of the site across the alley, which is a private alley. This is looking slightly northeast, just again at some of those single-family rental homes. So this is the private alley. This is looking from the sidewalk that's on Lincoln. You'll see it goes all the way through. You can kind of see the railroad tracks off in the distance there at the eastern part of the property. Then going north, I think this is just important to see the condition of the sidewalks here and of the driveways, which are something that we'll be addressing in this coming year with the resurfacing project for Lincoln Avenue. We'll be doing pedestrian improvements as well. But just a couple of views of the sidewalks and the existing conditions there for your benefit. A little further north, this is just showing the northernmost driveway. You'll see it comes out very, very close to the intersection of University and Lincoln. And this serves these commercial buildings that are here on the site. And then this is just looking more east down University Avenue. Just for context, just to the west across the street, this is what the Einstein Bagels, or I guess it's a University of Illinois building, but I think of it as the Einstein Bagels building. So that's what it looks like on the west side of the site. To the northwest, you'll see the old Illinois American Water site, which is being redeveloped as the Retreat, which is townhouse development. And then directly north, there's a parking lot for some Carle hospital uses. Continuing to follow the site boundary, this is the northern boundary of the site, is this railroad track, which is pretty sparsely used, but it is still active. I think we hope one day that the Kickapoo Rail Trail will be extended along this section or next to the railroad. This is looking north on the northeast corner of the site, just across University Avenue. On Busey Avenue, you'll notice that this is the driveway, the existing driveway going into the site. It's right by these railroad tracks. That's the driveway is the private alley there on the eastern part of the site. Looking west from that driveway, you'll see the commercial building and parking. And then finally, this is the southeastern part of the site with one of the rental units. And then finally, just looking south on Busey Avenue, you see St. Patrick's Church there on the left side. And that concludes the tour. Just as a reminder, the existing land uses in this area, so the red is business, the very light blue, which is almost impossible to see, are exempt uses. Those are hospitals, the hospital, and the and the church are the main ones here. And then the site itself, see it as business uses. It has those single-family rental, which is what the hatching is trying to indicate there, and then one multifamily rental in the middle. The zoning, as you're probably aware now, the northern half is B3 zoning, and then the southwestern part is B2, which is neighborhood business, and then the southeast is R4, multifamily residential. You'll see other business uses on University Avenue. To the southwest is a lot of B3U zoning. To the south, some multifamily, and then further south, single family. And then more multifamily to the southeast and northwest across Lincoln and University. Again, just a reminder, the future land use map in the comprehensive plan identifies this area as community business and also as an area that should be promoted as a gateway to the university district through architecture and urban design of mixed-use redevelopment. Let's not get ahead of ourselves there. Okay, that concludes sort of the tour and recap portion of my presentation. So I want to move on to address the specific issues that were raised at the previous Plan Commission meeting. The first one is building height and density. So while it's true the B3 district on paper doesn't have a height limit, the B3 district is constrained by other development regulations, the floor area ratio, parking requirements, building codes, and the real estate market. So the floor area ratio on this site is 4.0. So that means that in theory you could have a 4-story building that covers 100% of the site. That's not really possible, but you could, according to that floor area ratio. You could build a 6-story building on 3/4 of the site. You could build an 8-story building on half the site. That's generally, in theory, how floor area ratio works, or I guess in actuality how it works. But it's really unlikely that anything would be built taller than 5 or 6 stories on this site, even if the proposed development doesn't happen. Parking eats up a lot of space on the site. I think I'm going to flip all the way to the end. So this is an updated site plan. You'll find it in Exhibit J. You see, so this you can kind of see through the upper stories of the building. And you see that parking accounts for at least 2/3 of the site itself by my count. And what that does is limits the building's footprint and in some ways limits the density that you can put on a parcel. Moving on, building code really dictates, in general, the taller you build a building, the more expensive a building can get on a per floor basis, just because there are certain thresholds that if you hit those, if you go above six stories, your building gets more expensive per story. If you go above 9 stories, your building gets more expensive on a per story basis. And if you look, I don't have a slide for it, but if you look at Exhibit I, we've printed out tables from the International Code Council. And you can see in that table that to build a multifamily residential building that's taller than 6 stories would cost you an extra 15% per story. To go taller than 9 stories, it would cost an extra 25%. I know the table is kind of hard to make out. We do have our building inspector here. If you have questions for him later, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer those. But when you're talking about projects that are in the tens or 20s of millions of dollars, as we are in this case, 15 to 25% is not an insignificant number. So it's really going to help keep the cost of the building down, whether this proposed development gets built or not. Anything that's taller than 6 stories is going to be quite a bit more expensive. Finally, the real estate market obviously dictates a lot of what gets built. Typically in taller buildings, you're going to see office uses, residential uses, you might see some hotel uses. There aren't too many tall buildings that you're going to find too many different uses than those uses in. Right now in Urbana, we have a surplus of office space, so it's pretty unlikely that if this is rezoned to B3 that somebody is going to build a 5 or 6 or 8-story office building. So the other sort of tall building type uses we might see would be apartments or hotels. We don't think that a 5 or 6-story hotel is likely on this site, although I think from an economic development standpoint that wouldn't be the worst thing. So if there's no tall office building and no tall hotel building, you're kind of left with a building that's going to include some residential units, some apartments. And as you know, one of the cases we're reviewing tonight is a special use permit because in the B3 district, apartments require a special use permit. So if these parcels get rezoned to B3, and this development does not occur, if somebody comes in and wants to build, say, a 5 or 6-story apartment building, they would have to come to you and eventually to council for approval of a special use permit. So all of that kind of summarizes, or, well, to summarize everything I just laid out. Floor area ratio, the parking requirements, building code, and especially market realities really restrict the height and density that you're likely to see on this site. Again, the unlimited height in B3 is really on paper only when you get down to it. Okay, something else. Let me walk back through here. The next thing that was brought up in the last Plan Commission hearing was sewer infrastructure. I apologize for the maybe light color. It might be kind of hard to see on some of this. But typically a development process, the first step in a development process is getting zoning approval so that you can do whatever it is you want to do on a site. The next step is to, once you have your zoning approval, you get those detailed engineering plans done. And then at that point, you submit those plans to the city, and we have great engineers who get paid to review engineering plans and make sure that that the development makes sense and that the infrastructure can, in fact, handle what's going on. We have two of our two co-city engineers are here tonight if you have questions for them. That said, this site is well served by sewers. There are sanitary sewers, which are in green on your map. There's a sanitary sewer running down Busey Avenue that the development could likely tap into. If that one doesn't have the capacity, or it's just easier to tap into, there's an interceptor sewer over on Lincoln Avenue that should easily handle the development's sanitary waste. Regarding storm sewers, this site, the whole site is 2.5 acres. I know in your memo it says 1.5 acres, but that's only for the parcels to be rezoned. But the entire site is 2.5 acres, and anything over any development over 2 acres requires a stormwater management plan for any increase in impervious area that's being proposed. So a plan would be likely in this case, and then again that would be reviewed by our engineers at the appropriate time. Regarding site access, I'm first going to talk about automobile access. That seems to be often the most important one to discuss when you're talking about things like traffic and things. So currently there are, as you can see here, there is that access point I mentioned on the east side of the site that is essentially right next to the railroad tracks. I have them shown here as 3 driveways on the west side of the site. Those are 3 access points. The southern, these southern 2, I have them shown as 2 pieces. It's essentially just one large driveway, but the alley, the private alley, belongs to the northern site. So I just wanted to depict that that's the access point to the northern site. And then the one that I showed you earlier, the third access point is on the northwest part of the site. The proposed access would do a couple of things. First, it would shift the access point on Busey Avenue south of the railroad tracks. So that would be beneficial, especially if these sites get redeveloped in any way and they're successful, you expect them to have some increase in traffic. People will be going to and from the site. So if you redeveloped it in the current configuration and you have additional traffic going in and out, the way it stands, you have 3 access points on Lincoln Avenue. We'd probably require one of those at least one of those to be closed. But still, there would likely be access right on Lincoln Avenue under the current configuration. And then that point on Busey Avenue, yes, the railroad tracks are lightly used, but it's still not an ideal access point if you're having a decent amount of new traffic coming in and out of the site. So it shifts that access south on Busey Avenue. Also, it moves the other access point to Clark Street, which would remove all three of the access points on Lincoln Avenue. From a safety perspective, from a traffic perspective, this would be a good situation. You wouldn't have queuing issues at the light on Lincoln Avenue going northbound. It would be, we've heard that it's tough to turn left onto Lincoln Avenue or southbound from Clark Street. It would be pretty tough to try and make a left turn, if it's even possible, from one of those three access points. So getting rid of those access points on Lincoln Avenue would be, we feel, beneficial. I've sort of combined and I apologize, this is very hard to see from where you're at. Maybe I can zoom in, I'm not sure. Let's try. Nope. Let's see. I've actually never tried to zoom in on an active presentation. Apologize. So you can follow along in your memos and those exhibits, but essentially what this is showing, do I have a laser pointer? There we go. All right, so if people are following along in the audience, sorry, this laser pointer is kind of small. It's even smaller than the hand. Okay. So essentially what this is showing, you have the site here. Within 2 blocks, you have good access to public transit. There are MTD stops both at Park Street and up at, what's that called? Is that Church? Church, okay. And at Church Street, there's also stops for those same 2 lines, which are the number 6 and the number 22, over in front of the Campus Circle development. Further north, I should say that those buses serve, let me pull that out real quick. Okay, so the 22 and the number 6 serve downtown Urbana. They serve Carl, OSF, the Illinois Terminal, and downtown Champaign. Sorry, that's number 6. The number 22 serves the University of Illinois and apartment complexes along University Avenue and further north on North Lincoln Avenue. 4 blocks to the north is the number 7 gray bus, which serves Parkland College, downtown Urbana, downtown Champaign, and the Urbana Walmart. And then if you go, let's see, south from the site within 4 blocks, you have stops for the 13 and the Gold Hopper lines. And those serve the University, downtown Urbana, and downtown Urbana. Okay, so the site's got good access for buses. It's also in close proximity. It's a quarter mile from downtown Urbana. It's a quarter mile from the university. It's a quarter mile from the OSF campus, and it's essentially 3.5 blocks from the main entrance to Carl. I added some bike infrastructure on here. Over on a couple blocks east on Kohler Avenue, which I can't even find there's the pointer. Over on Kohler Avenue, there's a dedicated bike route. There are no lanes, but we dedicate certain streets as bike routes if they're good for biking on and they can get you to destinations. A little bit northeast, you can tie into some off-street paths, and I'm not sure if there's any other specified bike infrastructure in the area, but it is pretty, again, it's a quarter mile from downtown, quarter mile from the university, so you can bike places from here. I did want to mention, so of course there was discussion about traffic impacts last time. We don't at this time have a finalized traffic impact analysis, but we have, if you look on page 4, we've requested that the traffic impact analysis include a few things. One is just the total of vehicular trips that are expected to be generated by the development. 2 is to analyze whether traffic signals are warranted at Lincoln and Clark Street. And then 3 is to determine the projected traffic volumes along Clark Street and Busey in the area. I am not a traffic engineer, so if you have questions for staff, Craig Schonkweiler is a traffic engineer. He can answer those. Also, Chris Billing from Burns Clancy and Associates, who is preparing the traffic impact analysis, is here and can answer any questions you have for him. Another topic of conversation at the last Plan Commission dealt with property values. I think some folks were concerned that the development might decrease property values. It's highly unlikely that a development of $25 to $30 million is really going to bring down surrounding property values. So that's really all I have to say about that. As I mentioned back in 2016, there was a prior rezoning attempt. I'm sure you'll recall, many of you will recall that. And the request was to go to B3U for all these properties. I went and looked back at the Plan Commission minutes from that hearing, and it seemed like the 2 main concerns about that project or about that request at the time were that the intent of the B3U district was to serve the university and was to be kept west of Lincoln Avenue. So many people were opposed to any B3U district east of Lincoln Avenue. The second item was that it was kind of a speculative rezoning. There's really no developer lined up, and there was no development proposed at that time. So it, so there was a lot of uncertainty associated with that, and the owner eventually withdrew their application to rezone at that time. One final thing I wanted to discuss, which I addressed in the staff memo, are potential redevelopment scenarios if these rezoning and special use permit are denied. So we think there are any number of scenarios that could happen, but probably there are 3 that are somewhat likely to happen. So most likely is probably that the site would remain in its current underdeveloped state for the foreseeable future, which is undesirable. The comprehensive plan, which was adopted now over 13 years ago, clearly envisioned that this site would be redeveloped as a mixed-use gateway to the university district, and the current proposals would provide that. A second possible scenario is that the site is redeveloped sort of in a piecemeal fashion using the current zoning designations. That's also undesirable. As I pointed out, the access issues alone on the northern part of the site could create issues if that's developed to any great extent under the B3 regulations. In that scenario, the southwestern parcels would be developed as neighborhood business. The southeastern would be some sort of medium density multifamily. But again, the access points on Lincoln and on Busey would be problematic and could exacerbate existing traffic problems, especially along Lincoln Avenue. And it's true that desirable uses could be built under the B3 zone if that northern site is redeveloped as is, but it's just as likely to have uses that you might not want to see for an important intersection in Urbana. that could be built by right under the B3 zone. So a third, probably less likely scenario is that a developer tries to create a unified development that either is a by right development that crosses all 3 zones, which would be pretty unlikely. More likely than that is they would seek approval for a planned unit development. At that point, more plans would be drawn up, and a new round of public hearings would occur. Just to summarize, rezoning cases are difficult. There's really no guarantee that what ultimately gets built will be desirable, but there's no perfect zoning district at this time that would allow the proposed uses by right, but at the same time disallowing certain undesirable uses for the site. That prior attempt to rezone the parcels to B3U, which would allow the proposed uses, was ultimately withdrawn for those 2 reasons I mentioned, to keep B3U west of Lincoln Avenue, and because it was a speculative rezoning. We now have a willing developer who has a contract to purchase these properties if these zoning approvals are granted. They've made a significant investment in the project. They've created several versions of plans and architectural renderings for the site to respond to many comments from city staff earlier in the process. And really, the more time and money somebody spends up front on a project, the more likely and more committed they are to making sure that project happens. The proposed $25 to $30 million development proposed here would help to meet the objectives of the comprehensive plan by creating a mixed-use gateway on the site. In addition, and I touched on this last time, but I'm not going to go through all of them now, this proposal meets most, if not all, of the criteria that have to be considered for rezoning and special use permit cases. Because of everything I've stated here tonight, we feel that the Plan Commission should recommend approval of the rezoning and special use permit requests, with the special use permit subject to the conditions that the development be constructed in general conformance with the attached updated site plan, the one you have in Exhibit J, that the developer shall submit a final traffic impact analysis prior to any building permits being issued, and that the developer adequately mitigate negative impacts that the traffic impact analysis anticipates prior to the city issuing a certificate of occupancy. Want to remind you of what I mentioned at the beginning. It may be beneficial to consider the rezoning and the special use permits sort of as their own discrete items. They do have their own sets of conditions that need to be met. So I'll just throw that out there for you. And then I think I mentioned all of them, if not by name, then in passing somewhere in my presentation. But we do have Brad Bennett and Craig Schonkweiler, who are co-city engineers. They can handle questions you might have about sewers, roads, and things of that nature. And then Patrick Bolger is our building inspector, and he can answer questions you have about building code, building height issues, and all that. So that concludes, and I can take questions for you now.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Fell.
I have a couple general questions. And I know I've asked this before, but honestly, I don't remember the answer. Special use permit stays with the site, or does it belong to the owner of the site? For instance, if they sell it, does the special use permit go away?
If it were to sell to somebody else, and if they could meet the requirements in that they are doing a similar plan with similar uses, if it's basically the same project, a different owner doesn't matter. It goes with the land. If they wanted to do something totally different, it would be a whole new process.
Okay. Number two, when we ask for a traffic study, is there a requirement on when that happens? A traffic study in September is going to be vastly different than a traffic study in July in our town.
I think I'll defer to Mr. Craig Schonkweiler on that.
Good evening. So with our road improvement project, the city collected data in October, and that data was passed over to the consultant preparing the traffic impact study. When we collect data, we collect basically when students are present. So it would be in the fall semester, weather permitting, and the spring semester, weather permitting. That's the range. So the data is valid for this traffic study based upon the fact that we gave them the data. The analysis itself is independent of time of year, meaning that it's based upon the use of the site. It doesn't change whether or not it's June or July. I mean, in this case here, it's student housing, so it's using student housing numbers, which would be fall or spring numbers.
Is that good? All right. Further questions for Mr.
I
Garcia?
got one more.
Mr. Funk?
Hopefully you didn't cover this when I wasn't here, but is it possible for us to issue a special use permit or a PUD on this site without rezoning it?
A PUD would be possible, but so there were a couple paths forward that the developer could have taken, and after consulting with us, we felt, or they felt that rezoning with the special use permit was the best path forward. They could have tried a PUD. That's
Okay.
Further questions for Mr. Garcia? I just have one question about the third condition on the special use permit, which the developer shall adequately mitigate negative impacts of the traffic analysis. Can you give us, maybe the developer could give us a better idea, but assuming that there are something that needs to be mitigated, what kinds of things could the developer do, whereas it seems to me like the problems with traffic around this site have to do with the way it's laid out and the way into and out of it, that we talked about a lot at the last one. So the developer can't put a stop sign on, or a stoplight at Clark, for example. So I don't know, just in general, and I know, you know,
Well, I mean,
you have to wait for the study. But
right. So a way to mitigate would be, for instance, at Lincoln and Clark, we would have extreme congestion that would be mitigated with a traffic signal. That would be one mitigation. It could be where pedestrian traffic is at a level that there needs to be some type of safe crossing along Lincoln at Clark. Say, for instance, a refuge island, a wider refuge island in the middle of Lincoln. That could be one method. Let's say they were proposing to have an access point that is really close to University Avenue. They're not doing that.
they could
but-
move the access point.
Yeah, we could move the access point. We could require them to do that. We could restrict the number of access points, perhaps, during negotiations of a site. Those are the kind of things. Does that help?
It does. Yeah, sure. Some of it still sounds like it's going to be on the city. I mean, if you're talking a traffic light or,
Well, okay, so let's
So-
speak of that. That would be
median.
That would be
Yeah.
negotiated.
okay.
It'd be negotiated, so
Would
as
you
an-
ask the developer to pay for it?
there's a possibility. I think, though, that's something that would have to be decided at a higher level than me.
Sure.
But, well,
That happens with everything with me.
right. But we would look at basically give and take, right?
Sure.
In the DOT realm, which means the Department of
Yeah.
Transportation is an example, which is independent of us, they would say 100% developer, 0% DOT. That's the way that world works. In our world, though, we don't work that way because 9 times out of 10, a developer may walk. So we want to work with them. But if a site is generating such a huge amount of traffic, we would likely look to that development to help us.
Mr. Ackerson?
Since I'm not sure which to direct it, I'm going to direct it to you, Craig. So my concern has to do with pedestrians as they're trying to access bus routes. And I know there's a couple bus routes that kind of serve the area now, but if you look at some of them, they're running like on the other side of University.
Right.
Or they are within a few blocks. But to cross Lincoln to get to one of those. So how would it work if you decided that you need it would be advantageous to get MTD to reroute a bus stop? Or would you be looking at, would part of the negotiation be, where are there current bus stops and where might we move a bus stop? As well as talking about pedestrian islands. I mean, you get the gist of what I'm saying. That,
Right.
Having to make modifications to better accommodate pedestrians, both as pedestrians, but as pedestrians trying to get to bus routes.
Right.
Because I would anticipate a number of these folks will be taking buses into campus.
Right. So concerning the bus routes, that would be part of the traffic impact analysis to assess where they're at now. Could some of them be moved? But it's really ultimately the MTD's decision to serve, right? Preliminarily talking with them, they have a lot of density to the west. They're on Goodwin that they, I think, want to maintain there. They feel that there's access points within walking distance, but that's preliminarily at this point. Now, as far as crossing Lincoln, the fortunate thing we're in this position with this development is the city is doing we're right now finishing up the design stage of a resurfacing project of Lincoln Avenue from Green up to University. And as a result of that, we've studied every crossing north of Springfield up to University, so that's Stoughton and Main and Clark. Now, prior to the development, what we found was that there's enough pedestrians crossing at Stoughton, which is 2 blocks south of the site. Also at Main, there's a large percentage of pedestrians that cross, plus bicyclists. And by the way, Main Street is a bike route east-west to the university. And those will necessitate the need for a wider refuge island. Okay, and what we're going to do is narrow the vehicle lanes on Lincoln, and we'll take them out of the middle area, and that'll create the space. Right now, there's a very narrow median. We'll widen that out to 6 foot, which will create a refuge space for pedestrians when they're crossing east-west. And we'll have signage that basically are down arrow signs with a pedestrian on them on both sides of the road. That's what we are planning to do, regardless of whether or not this development comes into being. At Clark, we studied that. At Clark, there's not enough current pedestrian traffic to warrant something like that. However, we were looking at what's called an unmarked crossing on the south leg there, because we do feel that pedestrians still cross there. And there would be space created, painted space that would be created that could work with this type of development and put a pedestrian refuge island if the study determines so. That, folks, is a change in philosophy through the years within engineering, that we used to be a car-centric society, and now we're looking more at pedestrians and bicyclists. For instance, at Main, as I mentioned, that's a bike route. It's also been identified as a very difficult intersection to cross for bicyclists. So we're going to do some creative things there where we merge the bicyclists off of the road and into a multi-use path, a wider path through there. It's using a concept that was developed within the Netherlands, and I'm pretty excited about it myself. But yeah, we do look at those things. So I think we're actually in a good position where the city's been out in front of this on our own, and then we're now working with these folks to say, okay, what are you generating now? What do we need to modify here at Lincoln and Clark?
Thank you. Ms. Billman?
When do you expect these changes to occur?
Well, so part of my world is also there is the environmental world, which is that we have clearances we have to go through and hoops, and I've got easements we have to obtain. But we hope, and first off, this is a budgeted project, so the city council has budgeted funds for this project. My hope is to get it out to bid here in say late spring, early summer. We would start construction in the summer. We might have a multi-year project, so it would be wrapped up in 2020 or so. It's a fairly large project. We also, by the way, we're going 1 block west on Springfield and 2 block east on Springfield also. So it's pretty large.
Great. Any further questions? Ms. Billman?
Do you have any data on Busey between University and Maine?
As far as traffic volumes?
Yeah.
We don't have counts on Busey. I don't remember. Do you know, Chris, if there was any counts on Busey that you had? Longer ago, but it was fairly low volume. Is that correct? I was thinking very low volume. I mean, when you get narrow at St. Pat's, it's really narrow. We have parking on at least one side of the street all the way through Busey. When I say low volume, just to put it in perspective, anything that's in a traffic engineer's world that's less than 1,000 vehicles in a day, that's low volume. So let's contrast that. University Avenue, we're talking 22,000 vehicles a day. Lincoln Avenue, 14 to 16,000 vehicles a day. Clark itself, I think we're seeing probably 400 right now vehicles a day. So I would venture to say that Busey's probably less than 1,000, closer to probably 400 to 600, somewhere in there.
I'm concerned about Busey because it's essentially only allows for one car to pass through there because
Right.
it's a narrow street and there's parking on one side.
Right.
And with the increased vehicle traffic, it concerns me. Is there any possibility of taking away parking, street parking along there? Would it be considered?
Well, so from my standpoint, I think parking is a good thing, because parking in itself serves as its own traffic calming. So if we widen that, say we remove, well, now we widen the road out, so to speak. And what we find then vehicle speeds go up, and we don't want to necessarily encourage Busey to be used. Quite frankly, from my standpoint in the city, we do not want to encourage Busey to be used for this project south of Clark.
Even with this new development, you don't want it used?
I don't want it.
Then that just causes more traffic problems for that development.
Well, so let me speak to
Take
that.
it to discussion, I
Okay.
think. Yeah. Oh, you can go ahead and speak to it.
I'll speak to it. Preliminarily, Burns Clancy Associates has done the initial analysis, and the volumes generated by this, the expected volumes, are fairly low. And it's because it's a student housing type development. It's different than an apartment complex that's, say, for professionals that all leave in the morning and they go in the afternoon, or they're coming back in the evening, that kind of thing. This is more scattered throughout the day, and then also you have more pedestrians. Our students become pedestrians. They walk to class, they ride their bicycles, and they use transit. So we're not expecting a huge amount of traffic from this development. Matter of fact, I'll take it a step further. They looked at the signal warrants for Lincoln and Clark, and preliminarily, it's not warranted. There's no signalization. So that right there tells you that it's not enough traffic, really, that, to me, that would be of concern to go down to Busey.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions at this time? Thank you.
Okay.
All right, now we'll entertain public input, and let me remind everybody of the procedures for public input in a Plan Commission meeting. First, the petitioner can address the commission and provide further evidence on whatever changes have been made to the design. Then anyone in favor of the proposal will be allowed to address the commission. Following that, anyone opposed to the proposal will be allowed to address the commission. And finally, the petitioner will be able to come back and sort of wrap it up. I do want to address one issue that I forgot to address last time. If you have questions of the developer or of city staff, please ask the commission and we'll relay those. So in other words, ask the questions through me rather than directly. So if folks at Rail want to, Mr. Rail or Mr. Cooper, care to address this?
Good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm Graham Rail with Rail Development Corporation. Happy to be back here. I can just be here to answer some questions. The project is generally very much the same. I can, if you'd like, I can pull up the site plan one of the things that we've done really is just address parking. There's a little more parking now on this particular site. Some of the we've worked out some bike parking and access, but generally it's still a 5-story building, 4 stories over 1 story, and the same character, same architecture, same general style and feel. And most of what we've been spending time on is traffic and infrastructure, so Mr. Billing can comment on traffic. I will state, Mr. Ackerson, you mentioned about pedestrian traffic. That's something that obviously we feel exactly the same as you. We are, the street improvement program that we've started to see on Lincoln is exciting to us. I think it actually makes the project better, and we are willing participants to contribute to, our share of that and make sure that works well. So I just wanted to mention that. And if you have any questions for me, I'm here.
Questions? Mr. Fell?
Seems to be a lot of contention about how tall this is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
What's your construction type? You're far enough along, I hope you know what your construction type is.
Yeah, it's type 5. It's type 5 over a
A or B?
For the lay people, could you explain what
Yeah.
type 5A and B are?
Type 5 is wood frame construction.
Well, I know what it is.
Yeah.
Is it, are you
I'm
building
sorry,
in type 5?
Mr. Fitch asked me that.
I
yeah.
read the addendum in here, I'm like,
Yeah.
all right. So,
But
wood
it-
frame.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wood frame. And I can also speak to the parking.
I'm sorry, but again, are
Yeah.
you going to build in 5A construction or 5B construction?
Well, I truthfully don't know the
Okay.
difference between A and B. You
You can build taller in 5A than you
Uh-huh.
can in 5B.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm
And
sorry.
larger.
Right. No, I mean, we are building, a wood frame, 9-foot ceiling height apartment above, a steel podium on the ground floor.
Oh, so you're building platform construction.
We're building type 5 above a
Okay, that's
one
platform
level
construction.
podium. Yeah,
And you're building, okay.
yeah.
All right, we might discuss that more later, I guess.
Yeah.
But one question I had, and I kept going back to the old memo, or the original memo, and then looking here, you're going 5 floors all the way around,
Correct.
right? I thought at one point I read part of the proposal you were going to scale it down a little on the south side, but I must have imagined that. So you're going 5 floors all the way around?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you for clarifying. Any further questions? Thank you again. Thank you. Unless you care to address this as well.
Okay, good evening. I'm Chris Billing with Burns Clance and Associates, and I
yes.
would be here to talk specifically about some of the traffic. We're conducting a traffic impact analysis of this development. So I can give you an update. We've only been engaged a little more than a week. I think you saw a preliminary copy of our memo since that came out, or since I sent that in Friday. We've got some more work performed on it, and we'll submit it to city staff for review for where we are, and then continue on. But I can give you some breakdown of where we are to date with regard to traffic and the analysis we've performed. We did want to take a look at the larger, I'll say the larger neighborhood area, because while the majority of traffic will be utilizing Clark and out to Lincoln, we do expect some amount of traffic will want to go east, vehicle traffic. So we do need to acknowledge that and look at what those impacts are on the neighborhood streets. So we did kind of look at the area from Lincoln east to Kohler, go 2 blocks, and then basic from University Avenue South to Springfield. So we did want to take a pretty good look at the neighborhood and see for traffic that might be directed southward and eastward, where might that go and how might that impact the neighborhood streets, what we call the immediate neighborhood there. We do find that the student development type student-centered developments do generate a lot less traffic. I think even than some of the farther off-campus developments, this one being as close as it is to the campus itself, will probably have even more walkers than some of the ones. If you went north on Lincoln, you won't have very many pedestrians using that. And we also do expect an awful lot of bus riders there. I have been in contact with the Mass Transit District already to talk about where their existing stops are, and they are looking at some changes that they may make, but they wouldn't make something solely for this. They have a lot larger picture to look at. So I understand they're going through that or beginning that analysis now, and I'm not sure when MTD might come back with any recommended changes, either in lines, alignments of where their lines run, additional parking or bus stops and all. But there are bus stops that are located a block and 2 blocks to the north. That's the opposite direction of campus. There's a bus stop down on Springfield and Busey, so that's 2 blocks to the south. And there are bus stops essentially 2 blocks to the west on University. So basically 3 directions within a 2-block walk. There are bus stops that you can catch some of the various lines. And I fully expect a lot of students that would be accessing the buses would probably walk to the south one of Busey, down Busey, since that would take them, down Springfield directly into the heart of the campus, wherever they're going, campus bound. Bicycles as well. We might expect quite a bit of bicycle usage, since it's a fairly close ride. If we're 3 miles out and all, it's a longer ride in, but this is a fairly handy location, so certainly during the better weather months, not like winter, but you would expect maybe a fair amount of bicycle usage could equally result. We looked at the traffic that would be generated for the whole development and compared it, and routed that through the neighborhood and the intersections, and not just the northern part, because that's kind of disingenuous to only look at a piece of it. So we did look at traffic that the entire proposed development would generate. Basically, the area that's the current traffic that the area being developed now might generate something on the order of 300 ADT, average annual daily traffic, basically, if you look at it from that perspective. The new development, when we look at how many bedrooms and beds, and then the all suites portion of it that generates traffic at a higher rate, that generates on the order of 800 ADT. So there would be a net increase of about 500 ADT from this development over the background that you see there, the traffic today. And again, that's as it's distributed, a lot focusing out certainly on Lincoln, a little bit up, maybe up Busey to University Avenue if it's heading eastbound, and being able to take University, and a little bit down through the neighborhoods. The traffic does I think, distribute fairly well. The impacts, the main impacts that we're looking at right now, trying to artfully determine. There's more art than science in a lot of this about where destinations are bound from, and so when are the traffic and who's going out, who's coming in, AM peaks, PM peak times. There's a lot of analysis that you have to do to try to see what looks like it'll make sense. But for the most part, on any of the neighborhood streets, it looks like the maximum extra traffic that might be added to a street on a daily basis might be on the order of like 75 vehicles. And if you look just at a peak hour, that's on the order of 5 or 6 new traffic. So it's a really very modest increase, and we want to recognize that there is some increase, but it's really very modest from what this will be. And again, it's primarily because it's a student-centered, student-focused group, and that will be there. And mass transit really does service. I just actually looking through the historic traffic data that we got from starting with, you know, we got IDOT sources, KUATs, City of Urbana, different traffic counts. And actually, over the course of time, in the last 5 to 10 years, traffic volumes actually have decreased on Lincoln Avenue and on University Avenue, as well as other places. And I have to think a lot of that is maybe due to the you know, the public transit system that we have, and changes in people and how they go about doing things. But yeah, traffic starting in, I think, you know, 1991, 96, and you know, we looked at traffic counts going back that far, and then coming ahead. And in the last number of years, some of the traffic volumes really have gone down remarkably. You know, like from 1900 to 1400, as an example. You know, so it is kind of amazing, and society really has done that, and you can see it in the numbers right here, you know, in the traffic data that we have. So looking at an initial analysis for traffic signals, we're not adding very much traffic at the AM or PM peaks. So we were concerned about if a traffic signal might be warranted at the Clark-Lincoln intersection. And besides it being a very difficult thing to do, being so close to University, it's really too close. We're only adding, you know, for the various turning movements, you know, on the order of, you know, 5 here, 15 here, you know, turning movement-wise. And so, again, that's really modest, and it does not seem to hit any of the warrants that would recommend there being a traffic signal. If you put too many traffic signals up, it actually messes up traffic conveyance and your capacity on your roadway system, which increases frustration and can, in fact, cause more accidents. So, you know, we really want to put signals where signals are really needed, and not put it's the same with stop signs and every other traffic control device. You want to put them where they're needed, but if you put too many out that aren't needed, then that's actually detrimental to traffic and to safety on the motoring network. Actually, we find there would be some impact as far as the neighborhood streets, some impacts on the north-south streets, a little bit on Busey and even on Kohler. Kohler is better suited to traffic. It has a signal at University there, so and that's more of a collector street, not a local street. So some traffic that might be going east would be using that way. I don't really expect that we'll see impacts to traffic on either Main or Stoughton, because anybody that's outbound would be heading either to Lincoln or to Springfield or to University to go places. And so the most direct routes to those 3 streets from a traffic standpoint is what we would anticipate. Craig mentioned about the work that the city is doing as far as pedestrian and bicycle improvements along the Lincoln Avenue corridor, and he's right. That will be very instrumental in making the crossings, pedestrian and bicycle crossings from this development, much more safe and safer for the motoring public as well, when that can be accommodated correctly. So I see that as a very good, I guess very fortunate thing that this is going on right now, and it would be can accommodate this development, I believe, very well. Again, we're not quite completed, but I think our preliminary analysis really has indicated there are certainly some traffic increases, as we would expect, but they're really fairly moderate, given the size and scope here, and again, it's largely due to the public transit that's available. It really is.
Great.
So if you have any specific questions,
Yeah,
there's
any
a few
questions?
things I maybe haven't addressed, but
The only question I would have is, do you anticipate having it before it goes to council, depending on what happens tonight, of course, but...
certainly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, we're very close, and again, some things are, just kind of wrapped up late this afternoon. I've been reviewing and all to
Yeah,
be able to
right.
put into the report, but yeah, we've moved on this really very
Pretty
quickly,
fast,
just
yeah.
to gather the data to start with, and then to analyze it, and then project what's going on. You know, all of that does take a little bit of time to put it all together, but from what I've seen so far, traffic issues can be dealt with very easily.
Okay, well, thank you. No further questions? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody wish to speak to the Plan Commission in support of the proposed development? Does anybody wish to speak to the Plan Commission who's opposed? And if you think you're planning to speak, please raise your hand. And I think I'll give you a soft 5 minutes, but please, whoever wants to go first. And if you could please state your name and sign the roster.
I'm Carolyn Baxley. I live at 510 West Main. I served on the Urbana Plan Commission for 8 years. And we also discuss this area. Everybody has, even though that was quite a few years ago. But the proposal that you have in front of you seems to me more like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. The site is not suited for this intensity. It's got a diagonal railroad track that presents a problem. Nobody's mentioned the noise. We live on Main. We hear the railroad all the time. You know, it is a factor sometimes. But the main problem that I see is twofold. One is the egress. Clark Street and Busey are really not intended to take this kind of load. Clark has a historic brick street, by the way, and I'm not sure how that fits into the plan for this, because I think we do have a brick street ordinance in effect. It just seems to me that it's too intense. It's too big. It's going to require too much car traffic. I mean, I know that, you know, they're saying it'll be primarily students, but you really can't dictate that or control that at this point in time. I agree it probably will be more students, but my husband and I own several international student houses, and even international students have cars. They buy them when they get here, and they sell them when they leave. So just because it's a student population does not mean that it won't have intensive car use. The main thing that seems to me is the, you know, egress from Lincoln Avenue. And if you have to take everyone out on Busey, that's going to be a problem too, because it's just not suited for that kind of traffic. It seems to me too that you really should consider the impact on the historic district to the south, and it is a designated historic district in the 800 block of Main Street. It's one of our only historic districts, and this is going to back right up to it. You know, presumably there would be appropriate buffers, but, you know, there's going to be impact. There's no way around it. So my recommendation is to deny the request, simply because of the intensive use. We're already overbuilt in town. A lot of the units have low occupancy, and I just think that it's not worth the risk to the surrounding neighborhood and the risk to our infrastructure to allow this to go forward. So, thank you.
We'll just go on the roll. Hello, I'm Suzanne Bissonette, and I live at 804 West Main, which is on the south side of Main Street, in the Sarah and Matthew Busey house. I'm sorry, it's on the north side, I'm sorry. That's completely wrong. I meant the north side of what's being built, so. For all of you, I'm not going to go through all my comments that I presented the last time I was here, except for Mr. Fell, I think, was the only one who wasn't here. But just to summarize, first of all, I do stand opposed to this rezoning because there's several issues that I had concern with. I don't feel that the studies that have been presented in any way address what my concerns were. I had a concern, or we had a concern about water. You know, a property this big, I believe, where's the water retention? Or, you know, we talked about sewer, but doesn't a building this big require some retention basin? Or not?
It's going to require a stormwater management plan, and that could take many forms. I don't see a basin on the plan.
I see no basin on the plan.
I don't know what it's going to be.
You want me to comment on that real quick?
That'd be great.
Sure, if you could just, come on up to the mic.
Brett Bennett. Based on the zoning that's proposed for the project, they would have to provide stormwater detention. Since it is an infill development, they only have to provide detention for the net increase in impervious area. So basically, any impervious area out there, since it already drains off undetained, they don't have to provide detention for. But any new impervious area that they add, they would have to provide stormwater detention. Now, that could be in the form of underground detention, that would be on the surface of the yeah, so they would have to provide detention.
So how big would that be? Because that was not mentioned at all.
Well, you know, at this stage, they probably haven't sized it. The requirements for city ordinance is it has to hold, the storage volume has to be the difference between the 50-year post-development storm and the 5-year pre-development storm. So they would have to run through those calculations to size how many cubic feet it would be, and then based on.
But isn't that something that, that city staff could have
Ms.
already
Bissonnette,
calculated?
Could you address the commission?
It's done as part of the site plan submittal. I mean, there is quite a bit of time involved in putting together that analysis. And it is a requirement for the site plan approval. They have to run through that and get that approved by the city. Typically, at this stage, they wouldn't have done that.
If you have any further questions, you can ask me and
Okay.
I'll
Yep.
forward them on.
That's great.
Thank you.
Again, the height, I am very concerned about the height, and probably Andrew was the only one who didn't see this. This will be the view out my back window now, 5 stories looking down on me. I hope they enjoy me, you know, sitting there drinking a cup of coffee. I don't know, could you raise your hand if you have walked across University from the south side to the north side on the corner of Lincoln? So this would be on the southeast corner, getting to the northeast corner. Who's walked across that?
Not there.
How many lanes of traffic?
5.
And you land on a little island, all right? So, I mean, I think this is a serious consideration. I brought up safety before. We did see that there was bus routes, and the only way to get to those bus routes, they're kitty corner from this location. So, I mean, I think this is a really serious consideration, the safety. You know, if they're all students and they're not going to drive, then that means they're going to take a bus. They're not going to walk. You know, if they're on the further down campus from engineering, and I think that's a really serious consideration. There's not a lot of pedestrian traffic, you know, going across to Einstein's there or going across north. It really is frightening to go to cross there when the traffic is busy. You did it in address how many more cars there would be with this size of development. You did not address what you're going to do with extra cars. So I didn't hear any indication of how many more parking spaces that would be taken up in the neighborhood, which is already really, really full from Carl, from the church, and from students. So where are the rest of the cars going to park? I have worked on campus my entire career. I have lived in Urbana, and I have lived, in this neighborhood since 1992. Lots of students have cars. So you didn't address, I don't think adequately, the increase in parking. So I'm very concerned about that. And then the final thing, because we own, me and my husband own 802 West Main. We also own 800, or is that the right address? 305. And 305 North Busey, so that whole corner, all those properties there. Mr. Garcia indicated that he didn't see any way that there would be a decrease in our property values, and I couldn't more strongly object. Of course there's going to be a decrease in our property values if there's a 5-story building right outside the back of our property and increased traffic and congestion in the neighborhood. Just because it's an expensive building that's going up does not mean that neighbors will not be affected by all the issues that are brought along with that size of a development. At any rate, so, any questions?
Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much.
I handed around a picture, that's where Suzanne and I
Yeah.
live.
Who are you, sir?
I am Randy Kangas. And that also means I haven't been on the commission for more than a decade, which makes me old. First of all, thank you for the amount of time and effort you put in. Been there. I know these are very hard. As Mr. Garcia said, there's no easy way out of some of this. But let me ask, and I'll try and be brief. Let me ask a couple of questions so you can ask staff. How old are the sewers in Urbana? And are we relying on the Greeley and Hansen stormwater plan?
Do you want to answer those questions now, Mr. Bennett?
I can if you would like me to.
I'm in charge. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Urbana's storm and sanitary system, I mean, they date back to, particularly the sanitary to the 1920 era. The storm sewer probably even earlier. This site does have quite a bit of sewer infrastructure around it. So, for example, there's a 42-inch storm sewer along Lincoln Avenue. Adjacent to the site, there's a 48-inch storm sewer along Clark. There's also a 24-inch storm sewer that goes down Busey. That's all on the storm sewer side. On the sanitary sewer side, there's an 8-inch sanitary sewer that runs down Clark and another one that runs down Busey that have sufficient capacity to provide for the development. So we feel real confident in the underground infrastructure being able to support the development. We've done some cleaning and televising inspections of the infrastructure, to assess its condition and make sure it's, there's no problems with that. And we'll continue as the infrastructure ages, to repair and replace, to ensure that it continues to function in the manner that it's supposed to.
So is it 100 years old, Mr. Fitch?
Let's see, this night, 2018, approximately, yeah.
Okay. And we're using Greeley and Hansen stormwater plan?
I'm not sure.
That was in one of the communications.
It's not in our memo.
Well, the Greeley and Hansen plans, there is both a sanitary sewer master plan and a stormwater master plan that were done back in 1980. We still reference that, and I did go through and check that plan. Based on the age of that, obviously, we're going to use more recent, televising data of, cameras that we ran through the pipe and assess the condition, based on that, as well as looking at any drainage problems that might have cropped up in that area. I mean, looking through both the storm and sanitary, Greeley and Hansen, I mean, there were no infrastructure improvements recommended for this area. There were no capacity, problems identified in the Greeley and Hanson. We are undertaking a new stormwater master plan here this current year with the city that we're going to look at stormwater infrastructure citywide. But really, our last plan was the 1980 Greeley and Hanson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I don't want any of my remarks to any way say anything bad about engineers. They're fantastic. You can take it as a criticism of leadership who always underinvest in infrastructure, and they're not rewarded for infrastructure until it fails. Then they're penalized.
yeah.
So engineers are great. I don't want anything I say today to be that. So we're relying on 100-year-old sewers and water drainage and a 40-year-old water plan. And you wonder if anything's changed in there. And that was my general questions on all of this. There are a number of single-family homes there. It's an old neighborhood. There had been a school on the other side of Lincoln. And we're going to massively increase the density. So all of my comments really are about density. On the Busey, I saw the Burns-Clancy and some of the other 34 pages here, and I got to tell you, I've been out of town, so I'm not really caught up, and I found it very confusing to read. But I would like to mention in the Burns-Clancy memo, we've now increased not from 412 beds, but 457 beds. So I wonder next time if it's going to be 500 beds. And they said 450 vehicles, and they did increase the parking to 272, but that still leaves a couple hundred cars. And if you remember, the developer said you'll be paying for parking. People are cheap, they'll find a place on the streets. So again, looking at the density, when I was on the commission and there was development on North Lincoln, they showed us a study saying every student has a car, pretty much. And I was surprised, the shocking thing to me is something like 70 or 80% of the students had never shared a bathroom. So when we talk about 457 beds, we might be talking about 500 people or more cars, 450 cars. So it makes no sense to me about talking about the transportation rates on Clark Street when you got a half a dozen little homes that are ripe for development when you're adding 500 people, and you're putting all of that on top of that. I didn't understand if you don't want people to come in on Lincoln and you want them to come in on Busey, why you think they're going to stop. And for those of you that weren't here last time, this is a picture next to our house on Busey on that particular day. So it wasn't anything special. That's not even a special snowy day, and as was mentioned, it's one lane. And when people are backing out, and there are curb cuts on the other side, we have two, or people parking at the church, it gets really exciting to try and pull out, let alone if there's snow or ice. So I don't really understand why we think people are not going to go down Busey or cut over to Main Street or go down further on Busey, other than the streets are really, really bad and really need repair. By the way, that 457 did not include amenities, that did not include staff, that did not include the service vehicles, that did not include people coming in for whatever retail they were talking about. So we're talking about more traffic than just a number of beds, if that part of it is successful. So I keep wondering whether, especially as we go across Lincoln, if we're forcing 21st century density on 19th century infrastructure. And that's very expensive. I'm not criticizing the engineers, but the numbers don't make sense to a layman like me. 8-inch pipes are not going to work. And so if we're going to do something, let's do it now. And also let's argue about who's going to pay. The second piece, and I'm trying to go fast, Suzanne showed the photo of this backing up to our back. And I want to explain a little bit, most of you are from Urbana. This was the reason why most of Illinois is a grid. The reason this is curved is this was the original animal path and Indian path through this area. It was the high water mark. It's hard to see now, but that's why the street is actually a little lower and you look up at the houses. Lincoln rode down this street. Lincoln stayed at some of the houses down the street that have now been torn down. These were some of the first families. This was, our house was Black Matt and Sarah Busey. It was a farmhouse. It's on the 1869 bird's eye map. It's a very thin veneer. So when you heard Suzanne and others who will talk about this thin veneer, we think it adds something more than can be measured in tax assessments. That's probably irrational on our part, and forgive us for that, but that's really what we're after. I was coming back on a trip, just got back, and I was reading The Economist, and there was something in there that really hit me. And again, I'm referring to density and how things get redeveloped. So in South Korea, apparently they're having a big fight over historic preservation in Seoul. And I don't know the details, but I liked this quote. They put it this way: since this area was earmarked for redevelopment, its decline has been accelerated by neglect. Most of the houses are now owned by investors who are just waiting for bulldozers to move in, said Cho Tai-chil, a local developer. Because they're expecting demolition, most landlords have given up on making basic repairs. And that sounded very familiar to me. So when the city staff says that these will increase values on redevelopment, what I'm hearing is, stop maintaining your house, get ready to turn it into apartments. And you might disagree with that, but who's going to want to play catch with their kid underneath the windows of a 5-story apartment building? Then you throw on the lights, the increased traffic, everything else. So this does have an impact on historic preservation. It will have an impact on traffic. It will have an impact on sewers and all the other things. And it's a really messy corner. So, I mean, I get it. I've thought about this for years of how do you do this, and I don't have a good answer. But I strongly disagree that this does not lose value as a single-family housing area. And perhaps that's irrational of us to think it's that there's any chance that this is going to survive. So, I mean, I've been thinking about this for obviously years. Our house is over 150 years old. Will this development be there in 150 years? And I'm wondering if our house will be there in 10 years, to be honest. I don't know. I would urge continuance until you get some of these hard studies, which sounds like they're coming, or deny and move it to the city council and get it off your back as an advisory group. Questions?
Yeah, I'm going to have to. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you could please state your name, although you're fairly well known.
I'm Naomi Jacobson, and I live at 803 West Main Street, and that's on the south side of me. I really have a couple of questions that I want to ask. And number one is to the developer, what have you developed, and I guess I'm asking this through you, what has been developed by this organization that we can look at that's on the same scale, the same size, that we here in Urbana can see the success of, their investment in it, and how that has turned out, and if it has, how long has it been occupied?
Okay, we'll have them come back up.
Okay. And then my other question, we were talking earlier, Randy was speaking about safety and traffic, and with the idea that there will be traffic on Busey, at Busey in Maine, has the Traffic Commission considered putting a four-way stop there? Because if we're going to be adding traffic on Busey, trying to cross Main Street, which sometimes is pretty tricky to get out onto Main or cross it, perhaps this is a time to consider, with the addition of traffic, consider a four-way stop at Busey and Main. Thank you.
Anything further? Any questions, Ms. Jacobs? No? Thanks. I'll go ahead and actually ask the... Oh. You could stay to hear the answer to city engineer. I assume the answer is it depends on the study, but...
Yes. It depends on the study. Yeah, I think, I mean, we would have to look at that, but I don't have that answer today. But it would depend on the study.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, thanks for coming up. If you could state your name, please.
I'm Phyllis Williams. I live at 810 West Main. And I, too, did a stint on the Plan Commission. Thank you. It is long. Okay, so right after our last meeting, we learned about an engineering study that had been done by one of the neighbors of the Lincoln, Nevada proposed development by Burns Clancy. And we said, wow, that's what we need, because it really had addressed many of the things we brought up last time. So that was Thursday night. We found out Friday. Monday morning, we went down to Burns Clancy, and we found out, by golly, they'd been hired by the Real Corporation. So then they said, well, why don't you go to MSA, and maybe you can get your study there, because it sure looked like it was going to solve, at least answer some questions. MSA had been hired by the Real Corporation. Maybe we could contact the Department of Urban Planning, but it took a week to find that out. So, because of the bad weather, a sick child, whatever. So, we haven't heard back from the Department of Urban Planning. We really don't know quite where to go at this point. Just thought I'd let you know that's what we've been trying. But there are a lot of observations in the Burns Clancy, and this was a study done for Betty Anderson, that really spoke to our concerns in this case. And I realize every site is different. But, and of course, traffic and parking and density were central, because this was a 5-story proposal down at Lincoln and Nevada, which ended up being built to current zoning and seems to have done well doing that. The density was unacceptable. They were actually asking for a parking waiver so that they didn't have to have as many spaces. But it did cite uncommon density compared to the neighborhood. And that was at 5 stories. And it would be the only 5-story building east of Lincoln. Well, here we are. Our opposition to the last proposal for this site was not based upon a lack of a plan or a lack of, well, it wasn't. Because of our time on the Plan Commission, we've learned it's zoning, and that's what it's really all about. Anything that's allowed in B3 could happen if you grant B3. And then here we sit in our historic homes. And I don't say that as some sort of moneyed elitist, but this is a residential neighborhood with residential neighbors. And it just makes sense to step down your zoning more than that. Okay, it does. In the Garcia memo, thanks, Kevin, but there's there's no, you know, everybody talks about, well, it'll be so expensive to build above 6 stories now that, you know, it won't be done. I don't believe that. It comes to bite people over and over. What was the zoning? What was the zoning? Because anything that can be allowed might happen. All of the density issues are being analyzed on this site only, but you've got to remember that we've also added 476 beds up at the retreat. And so between Gather and Retreat, there's almost 1,000 beds that are being piled into this area. And so that's stormwater and sewage and traffic and mass transit demands. The campus has just increased the parking rate, and that's going to increase the pressure on our streets for parking as well. If you put a sidewalk in on Busey between University and Clark, then you need to keep on going, because there's a great bus stop there at Busey and Springfield, but there's not much of a way to get to it. And with the traffic so tight, you put pedestrians out in the street. Part of the study for Lincoln and Nevada from the Greeley and Hansen stormwater master plan cited that their stormwater handling capacity was a 2-year event. And I don't know why we would think that we've got it any better up in our end of town. A 2-year event. When Mr. Garcia, pardon me, I've got cotton mouth. When Mr. Garcia considers the property values and that this would surely not be deleterious, but he's only considering the houses that currently exist on Clark and not the surrounding homes. He's only considering the homes that are to be demolished as a comparison. So, it would be refreshing if somebody would actually try to come up with a design, pardon me, that actually uses the zoning as it exists right now. It happened at Lincoln and Nevada, and everybody seems to have adjusted well to that. And I think we could do that here. I urge you to just consider that for me. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Oh, thank you very much.
All right.
Hello, sir.
Good evening. I'm Daniel Folk. I live at 807 West Main, so I'm on the south side of Main Street, in the Main Street Historic District. I really wish I could support something like this. I can envision something like it being appropriate for this site, but it's so big and has so many people, and 5 stories within, I didn't measure it, but it may be 100 feet, of not only single-family residential, but the only contiguous historic district, I think, in Urbana. And it's just bigger than I think is appropriate, and there is not sufficient buffer between the historic district and the single-family and the proposed 5-story building. That's really all I have to say except this, that I've lived on this block since 1980, and as a matter of fact, when I moved there, I was a student, and I can assure all of you that whether I was traveling by bicycle or by my motorbike I used on campus or by car, if you need to go south on Lincoln, you go down Busey, because unprotected left turns onto Lincoln just aren't practical unless it's the middle of the night, and they're dangerous. I think everybody who lives in this development will find that to be the case as well. Busey is unimproved, or not very improved, north of Clark. And between Clark and Main, if anything is going on to the church, it is at best one lane, and sometimes almost not passable with one vehicle if it's very large. And the rest of Busey is quite narrow as well. So I don't think it is practical to think about this large a development with its only methods of egress into arterial streets being Busey or a left turn onto Lincoln. Any questions? That's all I have to say.
Any questions, Mr. Fell?
The question, I've heard, I think, from everybody who's come up here to talk about the project, in opposition to the project, that one of the complaints is it's too big, we need a bigger buffer. How much buffer do you think you need from a project of this size? What's an appropriate buffer?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you
How's
live.
that for an
I mean,
answer? I think this is not enough, but I don't know how much,
Well, I'm going to make a guesstimate, and just as
Okay.
a generalization, you live on the south side of Maine?
yes.
I'm assuming the lots on Main Street where it's narrow are probably regular city lots, 132 feet deep. So if you're on the south side, you're 120 plus, you're 400 feet from this building. You're more than a football field. So
You're right.
But, and I really just want clarification of how the
But it's
historic
not-
district feels about this. 400 feet's not a big enough buffer. What is?
It's big enough for me. It's not 400 feet to the historic district. And the impact on the historic character of our neighborhood is going to be impacted because it's 100 feet from Mr. Kangus's property line. It's probably a little less, just thinking about the shape of those lots over there, from the Price House next to Mr. Kangus to the west. From my perspective and my property, 400 feet's adequate, but I think it impinges on the historic district as a whole.
So is, in your opinion, 400 feet adequate from the historic property?
Probably.
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
Any other questions? Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else from the neighborhood? Developer would like to come back up. I do have the one question that and if you want to add anything else, please feel free. So if you have anything to add, otherwise I'll ask the question that Ms. Jacobson asked. I don't know that you can provide an answer tonight, but if we have another hearing, or if you, prior to city council, if you could ask the question as best as I understand, wrote it down. What other developers have you done that are similar in scale, and et cetera, that you could show for comparison and talk about your experience with them?
Sure.
Whether they're successful, what problems you encountered that you resolved, things of that nature.
Sure, I'd be happy to. One that I can think of is one of our first student housing projects is called City Park at Fry Street. It was built in Denton, Texas. And it was built also within a neighborhood. It was actually an old hospital that was built in the 50s that we, and there were people in the neighborhood that were very sensitive about it. A lot of their kids were born in that hospital, and we went into that neighborhood and we really, addressed the concerns. I think we built a very sensitive project, and that was in 2002. So we're talking about, 16, 17 years later. Several years after we built it, it was acquired by the largest publicly traded student housing company in the country. They still own it, which tells you that it was I think a very high-quality project that's still owned by this company. I can point to other projects. Even one of our most recent projects was built in a city called Bellingham, Washington, also within, it was very close to campus and within a neighborhood that had a lot of the older historic homes. We addressed, and Bellingham is a beautiful place, very outdoor-oriented. Our project was architecturally, very sensitive, fit into the neighborhood, and again, we addressed the site that was not pleasant and underutilized, and everybody today is very happy, from the city to the neighbors, and it was a very successful project. And always the first to fill up, and, you know, I think very successful.
Thank you
Sure.
for addressing that. Ms. Billman?
How many of these developments do you still own, percentage-wise?
As a percent of how many we've built, how many do we still own?
Yes.
65%. Sure.
Mr. Fell?
Since you're there, I'm going to ask this question. Do you know how many parking spaces for this development you're required to have? And how many do you have?
Yeah, if we pull up the plan, it's,
I thought it
Oh,
was
it is.
the
I didn't-
original.
I don't remember.
I thought it was in the
if you
original.
pull up,
All right.
if you pull up the plan that's in the, is it right here?
222, according to the original memo. That was the original, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it changed slightly. I'm not seeing it exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's 204
Yeah,
Is-
required
what I'd
and
like-
provided.
Okay, that's what's provided?
yeah,
Correct.
we have, I think the number is 204, and we have exactly 204 spaces, and I think the bike park,
On that current site plan?
on this current site plan, yeah. And I think the requirement was 102 bicycle parking spaces, and we have 105. I need to double-check those numbers, but
Okay,
it's
uh,
something right like that.
I'm going to ask sort of a technical question.
Yeah.
On your site plan, the squares are your accessible parking spots? Well, what I'm driving at is there's no accessible parking shown on your site plan, and in 200 spaces, you're going to need quite a few of them.
Yeah, I'm sure that as we get into the more detailed design, we will make sure to address
Okay.
that.
Well,
It is my guess that you are correct that some of them, they just aren't labeled. So obviously, and as you know, when we get farther along, if things are approved, obviously we get the detailed drawings, and it needs to meet zoning, or they
well,
need to come back.
One of our tasks, assuming this goes forward, is to prove this as conforming to the site plan we're given. And
Well, that is general conformance, so obviously something needs to meet code. You know, if they can't squeeze on another parking space, then they would need to lose a bedroom or two in order to make it
Okay.
work, so.
Right.
Any further questions? I do have one. Depending on, there's been a couple of options that Mr. Garcia threw out. Do you have any interest in this site as a planned unit development, or with any kind of working with the existing zoning? Maybe you can't answer that straight off, but
Well, I mean, our preference is to move forward.
I
We al-
understand.
we also-
You've got a proposal, so this is
and-
what
and
you
we
want.
al- And we also have some time constraints, so our preference is really to, move forward as we, as we're doing now.
Sure. Mr. Fell.
Sort of along the same line of a question, are you open to modifying your plan? I mean, I guess as a commission, is this site plan right now take it or leave it, or are you open to us giving some conditions to modify it and coming back? I'll take that, that's fine.
Yeah, you have to, yeah, I get you. Well, yeah, you'd rather we didn't, but
Yeah, I mean.
if we did, you'd have to take a look at it, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a pretty broad question. If we can do something within, general, we have given this a lot of thought from also a cost perspective. And, this is a project that we think is economically viable, how we've parked it, how we've, and the way we want to access all the different types of uses. We now have the extended stay separated from the residential, and the arrival is working well for us. There are a lot of things that we like about this plan that make it work.
I guess what I'm, and I don't want to get too far off track here, but what I'm sort of driving at is, One of the biggest concerns about the neighbors is how close you are to the neighbors. You have a giant leg of your building on the south side of the site, closest to the neighbors. Can we move that leg of the building? Are you open to doing that? If the commission wants some alternative option to,
Well,
I guess our job is we're
Yeah.
trying to be good stewards for our citizens and
Yeah.
being good stewards to our city. So we're trying to do both of those things at the same time.
right. I don't want to say I'm not open to hearing suggestions. I am. I don't want to, obviously, if I could avoid it, I don't want to be delayed, number one. Number two, I will say that, again, we've thought about this plan quite a bit, and I would just be concerned how we would park it. I would also be concerned how the Clark Street, we wanted to have a presence on Clark Street to create, a certain environment. And so moving that leg of the building, it's also a very efficient building from a cost standpoint. So again, it's not that I don't want to hear the suggestions, I'd be concerned that it wouldn't work.
All right. Any further questions? Thank you for answering. Those are hard questions, so. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'll close the public input portion of this, and we'll discuss and may possibly vote, depending on how the discussion goes. Anybody have anything that they want to start with? Mr. Ackerson?
Yeah. I had asked the last time, I know the proposals for B3, and the question had come up, why not B3U? And Kevin mentioned the last time we looked at this piece, and I remember that discussion. I remember the part where we said we didn't have enough of a detailed plan. I did not remember the part where it said we didn't want anything west of Lincoln. And I think the neighbors don't want a 5-story structure west of Lincoln. However, there's a fairly sizable part, as Lou pointed out last time, of this lot. You could currently build 5 or 6 stories with the current zoning west of Lincoln. Given the intersection where it is, Lincoln and University, and in our own plans, calls for that to be a gateway into the University District, not gateway to the University, which occurs further south, but to the district. This looks, I've looked over the B3U requirements, and I think the biggest objection to going B3U is folks don't want a 5-story building. We've heard the concerns about traffic, we've heard concerns about sewer, and I wanted to hear those addressed, but I just want to throw it out there. I'm not saying we should approve it. I'm throwing out there the notion that B3U might actually be a more elegant solution, because if you go B3U, you don't have to do all these plans, you don't even have to consider the special use, because it covers everything they want to do in that one block of area. South of Clark Street, they're already doing townhomes within permitted use. So there's already going to be 3-story apartments that will serve for a block as a buffer going into the historic district. I think the real issue is folks don't want a 5 or 6-story building on that corner. And I don't think if you're ever going to develop anything on that corner, you're going to get anything less than a 5 or 6-story building. And currently, somebody could come in and build something within the existing zoning. So the arguments about we don't want that big, somebody could build that right now. I hear Andrew's comment, because if there's just a small corner, not a small corner, but there's a corner of Clark and Busey that is zoned for multifamily residential, or I forget which R level it was. But the rest of this is either already a B3 or, what was it, B1, B2?
It's his neighborhood,
which
or R4.
Yeah, so the B2, the main difference there, I think, is height.
Correct.
The issue there
One
is
of them.
35 feet. So that addresses part of the neighborhood's issue about that. So if it was, I had the same question you did earlier, which was, does it tear down from a 5-story to a 4-story till you jump across the street to a 3-story? The 35 feet would be an issue. So I don't know. I would just like for us to consider in our discussion whether B3U would be a more elegant, because I'm just dealing with the zoning piece of this. If a B3U would be a more elegant solution to this than
Seems-
doing B3 and then having to create all these special exceptions, or just sort of rejecting the whole thing.
I don't see that much of a difference between B3U and B3 in terms of this particular project. Multifamily is allowed in both. No, multifamily is a special use in B3. So B3, so that's it. It's the multifamily.
Right.
Yeah.
The multifamily is the piece that makes the difference, yeah.
But there's still no maximum height.
All right.
Mr. Hopkins.
Okay, I want to argue that the advantage of B3 is that you can't build residential without a special use permit. And given the location, and given from a real estate development point of view, the only demand, and you can argue about whether it's real, is for residential, that by using B3, we force a special use permit, which lets us look at it. And if we went B3U, we wouldn't. So I prefer B3 to B3U.
Ms. Billman.
Well, I'm confused, which is pretty typical. If they want to change it from B2, which has a maximum height of 35, then moving to B3 is a big difference. I thought you were saying that they already could build as tall as they wanted.
On the front part of the lot, which is already B3, that is true.
Okay, I got it now.
Yeah, the north part of the lot.
Okay.
Anything further? Mr. Hopkins?
Okay, I guess I would, I don't know whether we want a motion before we discuss, or we want to discuss before we have a motion.
If you're ready to make a motion,
So let me preface making a motion.
okay.
We have a lot of goals in our comprehensive plan, and among them are having intense development close to where people want to be, as opposed to way away from where they want to be. And we have identified locations where we think that can work. And by having the mix and pattern of development that we have, we are able to make reasonable trade-offs between having density close to campus and close to downtown, and still protecting specific things, like an historic district and the State Streets area, which for at least 3 people in the audience who've been on the Plan Commission before, you know how those places go. So I would make a motion to send to the City Council with a recommendation of approval
This is the zoning.
the zoning, Plan Case 2361 M18, with a recommendation of approval.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins. Second by Ms. Billman. Now, further discussion. Nothing on Mr. Fell.
I think I just want to say, I think since I've been on the Plan Commission, this is the 3rd time I think this site has come here.
I think, yeah.
And it
At
keeps
least.
coming here because nobody can do anything with it, the way it's currently zoned and laid out. And we finally have somebody who has a plan and wants to do something here. So, in that aspect of it, I'm thrilled. So.
Mr. Turner? You're thrilled with that aspect of it? Great.
Yeah, as Mr. Fell said, my only concern is if there will be an impact on the historic district.
That goes to the, well, it's relevant here, too.
I'm going to bring up
Mr.
another
Feld.
point. So in this rezoning that we're going to do, we're rezoning it to a zoning district that has unlimited height, correct?
Correct. Well, given the,
Right.
Yes.
As a person who does this for a living, I'm a little uncomfortable along Clark Street to give it a zoning district that has unlimited height. And I say that because we're not, the zoning change doesn't limit the construction type, it doesn't limit a whole bunch of things under the building code, and very easily here, in a cost factor that's not very much above what they want to do, we can build 80 feet tall here. Not very difficultly, and not in much of a different construction type. And that kind of makes me nervous, because I don't think that's appropriate. So I don't know if we can do this. Can we change the zoning and impose another height limit?
no.
Well, not tonight, but obviously,
Yeah.
obviously there, as you know, the ability to amend the text of the zoning ordinance.
But is that a condition we can put on the
We
rezoning
cannot
case?
place
Okay.
conditions on rezoning cases. I will say
Yeah.
that I have asked staff to start researching what an appropriate height we might want to propose to this very body.
Okay.
I will say that.
As a commission member, I urge you to make the height in feet and not in stories, because I can build a one-story building that's 40 feet tall. And I
You
have.
probably have, yeah. Well, I'm very uncomfortable with B3 on the south side of the lot. I think that the neighborhood needs the height protection on the south side. So that's just where I'm at in terms of strictly the zoning. I'm like you, the fact that they've got something that works is fantastic. There's a parking lot at Goodwin and University that is perfect. But that's not what we're talking about. So we're talking about this crazy lot. So I'm uncomfortable with unlimited height so close to a single-family residential, especially the historic district. Anything else? And the reason I'm uncomfortable is for many of the reasons that we heard here, density primarily, but also just the look and feel. We've got one contiguous historical district, and it's a special thing, and we're not required to buffer, to your questions, but I think it deserves some special consideration.
I wish the southern part that faces Clark Street was not planned to be 5 stories. But I'm trying to just deal with the zoning piece of this, because
Right
then
now,
you
yeah.
still end up with split zoning in this
Sure, it's hard.
block,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mr.
It's for
Fell?
city staff. Is there a way that is there a vehicle we have to change zoning and limit height? I mean, we could do it through their special use permit, but that seems not the wisest way to do it, because they could just abandon their special use permit.
So city council has the ability to enter the city into a development agreement, which could impose different limitations on the site. This group cannot enter into that. We discussed that as a possibility. That's still out there. I am somewhat concerned about starting to do that here, because then we'll be asked to
Do it all
do
the
that
time.
everywhere, and I'm not sure where that might go with the courts.
Sure.
But that is something that we could consider, or, excuse me, continue to discuss with other city staff. Should that be part of your discussion tonight, if you were to forward it to city council, that is something that we could discuss at the city council level if that's where it needs to, if that's what we need to do.
All right. Any further discussion on the zoning question? Mr. Turner?
I understand, and I do agree with what's been said previously. I do worry a bit, though, about what will happen with this property. It is, I mean, coming down Lincoln South, it is an eyesore.
Oh,
It's my first time here in Urbana, I was like, what is that over there? I do worry about what we can do. Certainly if we don't approve this, what will happen? I don't have an answer necessarily, but in terms of discussion.
I think the three
what-
scenarios
what
that
makes the
Mr.
best
Garcia
sense here?
laid out are pretty good scenarios, and probably, are based on our past experience, nothing. I mean, but we have a different party here that we're working with, so maybe there are other possibilities. I hope there are. So, further discussion? If not, we'll have a roll call on the zoning question, which is Plan Case 2361M18.
Ms. Spillman? Mr. Fell?
No.
Mr. Fitch?
No.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Weisskopf?
Yes.
Ms. Yu?
Yes.
And Mr. Ackerson?
Yes.
The motion passes. And now for the, so my thinking was if the zoning didn't go, then the special use was gone, right? So we'd have to either continue that or vote it up or down. So now the special use is in play. So, what are your thoughts on some of the issues dealing with the use, being the height of the thing, the intensity, et cetera, some of the concerns that were raised? Anybody have thoughts about that?
I have a couple thoughts.
Mr.
I
Fell.
think in terms of just the special use permit, we need, they obviously have at least a height of this building in mind on the south side of the site, and I think we need to put a limit on that height in feet, not in stories. And I
Sure.
also, it's kind of a balancing act. I don't want to ask the developer to come back to us with another plan, but I think if he did, and it worked out financially by moving this giant leg of the building north, it's going to make the neighbors happier. I don't know all the ins and outs of their development. Frankly, I don't see it having a giant impact on the cost or the efficiency or anything in their development, but I think it makes his neighbors happier. I don't want to put an encumbrance on the developer because I know how long it takes to do this.
Yeah.
And that's, in a way, counterproductive, but I'm worried about how big this thing is on the south side of the street. So.
Anybody? I agree.
I agree about the part that fronts Clark, particularly the Clark and Busey area. I don't have a good idea about how to fix that.
Well, there are ways to fix it. The question is whether it's going to be, cost, how much is it going to cost? How's it going to affect the profitability? And, is that up for the developer? Anything further, fellas? So a question here I would have then, unless you were going to make a comment, is that we've disposed of the zoning case. The special use case is open. Our two choices here are to continue the special use case and hope that some solution can be arrived at. The zoning's there now, so you're not working with multiple zoning. So to alter the design slightly, maybe moving the wing is significant. Maybe I shouldn't say slightly. But in order to make this plan work and take the concerns of the neighbors into account. So I think those are kind of our two options now. Mr. Turner?
So I would just wanted to question, as far as the special use is concerned, are we debating whether or not to allow multifamily? Is
The
that
special
the
use
special
would cover
use?
the use that's proposed and the site plan as.
So the whole thing?
Correct.
Okay.
The multifamily, the hotel, the way it's laid out.
If I may, so the special use permit is only required in B3 because of the multifamily.
That's correct, yes.
Just wanted to clarify
Yeah, the
that.
hotel is allowed by right.
Correct.
However, we could set an explicit height limit as a condition of the special use permit.
Well, in particular, if that area of the building is the area that has the multifamily, yes.
And it is part of it.
And, I mean, this is, I guess in a way, my point earlier. If we don't pass a special use permit, they can build 50 stories on Clark Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, have we just now passed?
The zoning's
No-
in. Well, it's
So
not
no
in,
matter-
the council has, yeah.
Recommendation council. Okay, so we have just approved as tall as they want.
Like
Throughout the whole
champagne
area.
tall.
Yeah, champagne tall? Okay.
But that would require, concrete and things of that nature.
So I think it's pretty clear that we want to approve a special use permit. I think for the reasons
like
that
to.
have just been stated. So the task to me is to define the conditions. And I think we should put a height limit in feet. And to do that, we need to know what the height is. And I don't know that we have anything from which to extract that number.
I don't think so exactly, but I do think the developer said that the residential, is that interior ceiling heights would be 9? So so let's say,
Sure.
So let's just say 11 times 4 is 44 plus
15?
60?
60, maybe 65 to be safe.
Yeah, there,
Now, there are areas that have, architecturally, to give it that historic feel that we were trying, there was some corner elements that,
Those are on the north corner.
on the corners.
So we could put the height limit on
on the south.
the south
Well,
half of the lot.
Of 4 floors of residential plus over parking.
4 floors of residential over parking.
so let me get this straight. The special use permit, any condition we apply, applies only to the multifamily residential parts of the site design? Is that what you just said?
Well, it probably should really focus on that, yes. Unless somebody else has a differing opinion, but that was the most conservative, safest route.
Well, I'm trying to just, it does the special use permit applies to the whole site, but we could put the condition on, sure.
So I think we've got a number of 60 feet. And that would apply to the multifamily part of it, which leaves the corner and the other part, which I'm doing the renderings from memory now, not limited to 60 feet.
Sure.
I just want to point out, when you say multifamily, there's residential above the lobby as well.
Oh,
So,
okay. All
you know,
right, so we should
if
say.
if you wanted to talk about this leg
This
specifically.
particular part
that-
of Clark, off of Clark.
Okay. So the leg on Clark.
It's in some of the site plan stuff.
I was trying to remember, where is the extended stay hotel? I thought that was on the corner.
It's this wing, right here.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
But it's not all the floors.
Right.
It is actually. That's a change that we made in this particular site plan. So what we've done now, it's a little hard to see in this, but we're going to have the arrival here, right here in the middle.
Yeah.
And so this whole wing will be extended stay. There'll be an elevator on this side and an elevator on this side, so we can really separate the residential. Come into one more grand entrance. This will be a two-story volume
Right,
entrance.
right.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the building inspector has done some calcs and thinks that 65 feet might help to accommodate some of the extra things that we might not be calculating at this point.
65.
Yeah,
There's a parapet wall.
Okay. All right, I'm okay
But
with
there is
65 feet.
multifamily above the orange part farther to the north, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so 65 feet. The general conformance with the site plan, I think we can leave in that statement with
With an
the
additional.
sort of understanding of the record that we're always in favor of improvements. And for the traffic study condition, I would make pedestrian and transit explicit. And I don't think that changes anything, because it's being included.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth making it explicit.
So are you driving towards 65 feet for the whole part, or the whole thing, or just for the part that's not multifamily on Clark Street?
Can I throw in one
Yes,
little
Mr. Fell.
comment? I don't want to put the burden on the developer for this, but if he's building this, the top part of this out of 5A construction, 65 feet is his height limit. And John, would you check that? Sprinkled 5A, 65 feet is the height limit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
Yeah.
so 65 feet is okay.
that-
And was there another condition that I'm forgetting?
no, that they have to make changes according to the traffic plan, that it has to conform to the
yes,
site. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but I was including that in saying, add to that explicitly pedestrian and transit. Because I think sidewalks are as big an issue as anything else.
Well,
So then,
so does the 65 feet apply to everything, or is there going to be a lower
I
limit?
think that's the
On the Clark Street
simplest
part.
way to do it, and if there's some,
I'll chime in that according to the developer and his construction type, that's how high he can build.
No, I understand that.
So he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but we just did what
Actually,
he
I-
asked us to do.
Yeah, if, for what it's worth, it's fine with me, because
Yeah.
the whole
Well,
project is the
yeah.
same. Other than the fact that, again, well, if there's a parapet or if there's a corner element in it, can you just purely architecturally, can we have it at a corner for some, you wouldn't want that, period.
but it's because of code.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
building code issue of your construction type, not a aesthetic issue.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I don't have a problem. The building, I don't
The
know.
details we're not going to do design.
No.
And I was going to say,
We
if there's,
try not to do design.
if there's something
at
that
the
we
commission.
find out between now and council, what we would do then is present something to council and say, this is what Plan Commission said, here's what we found out. You know, maybe
Yeah,
it's 65.3 feet or something, you know.
So-
We could make that adjustment before council.
Sure, sure. So the reason I oppose the zoning is the reason I would have not opposed 65 feet for the whole thing, but I'm opposed to 65 feet on the multifamily parts of Clark, but the same reason that I oppose the zoning. I think
So
we
you
need
want it to
to
be
step it
lower?
down. I would step it down to 35. Which would be consistent with the existing zoning. And it cuts out 2 floors of apartments, essentially. So I don't know if they're, I don't know how they would feel about that. You don't have to say, you don't have to,
Well-
not asking you for your opinion now.
I like your idea, but if they don't go for it, then we've just approved that site to be as tall as anybody wants it to be.
Yeah, I know.
So, yeah, I think,
Yeah, recommended, yeah.
I think we have to go with the special use.
With the condition Mr. Hopkins added. Anybody? Mr. Ackerson?
I like Lou's proposal.
Okay.
Can we?
Mr. Turner?
Can we ask that the developer consider what we're talking about in terms of perhaps moving a leg?
I think by the record,
Okay.
yeah, but it's in the record.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we've, absent any further discussion, I think we're ready to vote. We don't have a motion? Oh, yeah, yeah. Motion?
Okay. I move we send case 2362 SU18 to the City Council with a recommendation for approval with the following conditions. And I'm looking for...
The three conditions,
are,
yeah.
The development shall be constructed in general conformance with the attached site plan. The developer shall submit a final traffic impact analysis, including pedestrian and transit, prior to the city issuing the building permits. The developer shall adequately mitigate negative impacts. The final traffic impact analysis anticipates prior to the city issuing a certificate of occupancy. And condition 4, the height limit for the building is 65 feet.
Maximum height.
Yes, maximum height, yeah.
Right.
Height, yes.
Okay.
It's
You're
minimum height.
correct.
Yeah.
I wasn't
Maximum
setting a
height.
minimum.
Yeah. Motion by Mr. Hopkins. Second by Mr. Ackerson. Further discussion? Can we have a voice vote when you're ready?
Mr. Fell?
Yes.
Mr. Fitch?
No?
Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Weisskopf?
Yes.
Ms. Yu?
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson?
Yes.
Ms. Billman?
Yes.
That motion passes. Do we have a tentative date for city council hearing?
February 18th.
February 18th, city council. Thank you all for your participation. Now, we don't have any old business. We don't have any new public hearings or new business. Does anybody want to address the Plan Commission on a planning-related matter that's not those cases? Thank you. Do we have a staff report? Do not have a staff report. We do not have a study session. Therefore, we're adjourned.